Former NFL offensive lineman Mark Schlereth ripped the Ravens and their fans for defending Lamar Jackson by saying he hasn't had enough help over the course of his career. We talk about those comments, the state of Lamar's pass-catching weapons currently, and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form, if you like to watch, we're here for you on YouTube Monday through Friday. And you can like and subscribe also in audio form if you prefer to listen to podcasts. Spotify, Apple, we have you covered over there as well. Same show, both audio and video, 5 days a week, either way. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Back here on a midweek edition of the show, just 1 day away from the 4th of July and 1 day closer to Ravens training camp. So that's what everybody's looking forward to right now. Still in the dog days of summer. Here to talk about some very spicy comments from a former NFL offensive lineman, the state of the Ravens in general. It is Cordell Woodland of 1057 The Fan. Cordell, I really appreciate you joining me again. How has this all been for you? OTAs, mini camp, we're almost a training camp. The offseason honestly has felt like it started yesterday, and it feels like it's also gone on for like 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely feel that the NFL is back, pretty much. It's right around the corner. Training camp, we're less than a month away. And it just feels like we're in the fast lane now to everything picking back up. And I'm excited for football season. Is kind of the best time of year for me.
Yeah, no, me too. And I know that the Ravens reporting a little earlier to training camp this year, obviously, because the main reason they're playing the Chiefs on Thursday night. So they got a little more time there to get acclimated before that game, which is super anticipated. But Cordell, there's a lot of discourse around the Ravens. There has been really ever since the AFC Championship loss. And for Lamar Jackson, he is unfortunately all too familiar with discourse surrounding him and everything that goes on in his career. And we got some very spicy comments from a former NFL offensive lineman, NFL analyst, Mark Schlereth, who I don't really know where these came from, if we're being honest. I didn't know Mark Schlereth felt this way at all. But he ripped Ravens fans for essentially saying that Lamar Jackson hasn't had any weapons, or at least not compared to some of the other quarterbacks in the NFL over the course of his career. Essentially what he said is he doesn't want to hear from everybody saying, well, they don't have any weapons. He hasn't given them any weapons. He ended up saying, well, how many first-round wide receivers do you need to draft? Had some choice comments. This is a family-friendly show. We won't get into all the comments he had to say, but the overall messaging was, you draft all these first-round wide receivers. You have these star tight ends. It hasn't been the pathway that some of these other quarterbacks have had, but he said he's sick and tired of hearing it, and it's not an excuse. And also even went as far as to say the quarterback is responsible for developing the weapons. What are your overall thoughts on that initially?
Well, I think he said a lot. And I feel like if we're looking at it surface level, maybe he's right. Just looking at it on the surface, but I believe context matters. Yeah, you could sit here and say the Ravens have drafted him all this first round talent, but what also needs to be mentioned, and that is Rashod Bateman has had to miss quite a bit of time due to injury. Hollywood Brown for the bulk, I would say, for some of his career, to the point to where he felt like he had to ask out to be traded. They weren't using him correctly. The numbers will tell you one thing. And I think, especially in Hollywood's last year, that was his best year as a Raven, but he came in hurt. He came in not being able to completely be himself. And then he's in a run-heavy offense at the time with Greg Roman. They weren't that was a team that was building around strictly bringing in a lot of tight ends, a lot of big body guys. They had a style of play that I think benefited Lamar for a while. It contributed to his legs, but I don't think it contributed to the development of Lamar's arm necessarily. I mean, his MVP year, he was uber efficient. The efficiency numbers are through the roof. We may not even see that again. So I think while in the same breath of acknowledging that Lamar has to do better with what he's been given. I think you can also say he's done a lot. He has maximized some of the weapons that he's had in some of the situations he's been in. It's, I think when people have gotten stuck in saying Lamar, it's too absolute for me. Obviously, Lamar has had weapons, but I think just by saying that, you can also acknowledge that some of these guys it hasn't necessarily worked out the way that it was supposed to. I think some of it goes beyond just Lamar. Like I said, some of this was lost time in the Greg Roman era, in the back end of the Greg Roman era. Some of his lost time due to injuries. Bateman has dealt with injuries. Lamar himself has dealt with injuries. Mark has dealt with injuries over the last couple of years. And then Hollywood is traded. Zay looks like a stud. But all in all, I mean, we're talking about a guy who has had to do almost everything in this Ravens offense. He's led this team in rushing pretty much every year as a starter. And we know what he does as a passer. So I think both can be true. Yeah, Lamar has had weapons, but also I feel like the Ravens could have done better during that time with Lamar, especially when he was still on a rookie deal, to use some of that money to go out there and get him premier weapons. Instead, they use that money elsewhere. And then it's like Lamar gives them the option of going to go get either Odell Beckham or DeAndre Hopkins. They go get Odell Beckham. It's like, okay, that was cool, but he's the lesser of the two. DeAndre Hopkins, I don't care what people say. I think DeAndre Hopkins can still play. I thought he showed that he could still play in Tennessee last year, despite inconsistent quarterback play. And DeAndre Hopkins, I think, would have helped them more than OBJ helped them last year. And I think DeAndre Hopkins would help them this year. So, like I said, I think two things can be true. I've been of the mindset that the Ravens have fumbled some of the time that they've had Lamar Jackson, specifically when he was on a cheap deal. There were times that they could have done more, and they didn't. And I think at times the Ravens have depended on Lamar to do too much at times, and it's caught up to them in various moments.
Yeah, Lamar has essentially had to play superhero for them on multiple different occasions over the course of his career. And I'm in 100% agreement with you, where I've been very vocal about saying they approached the wide receiver position during his rookie contract a certain way by drafting talent, but I think they approached it the wrong way for the most part. When you have a quarterback on a rookie deal, that's the time to go out there and get, whether it's an $100 million wide receiver or even like a 70, 80, 60, whatever it is. That's the time, because now Lamar's on this big contract and you have to kind of do these cap gymnastics to figure out what's going on. I mean, this offseason, we've seen prime examples of CJ Stroud getting Stephon Diggs. Will Levis not only has DeAndre Hopkins, but they just got Calvin Ridley. Yep. That list goes on and on. You can go back to Josh Allen and Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts and however far you want to go. The Ravens never gave that to Lamar. So the Ravens have invested in wide receiver with Lamar there. I'm not saying that they have done nothing to invest in wide receiver, but what you mentioned was Zay, and I thought that was a great point, because really essentially they would have hoped that the way it went with Zay so far, it has gone, they were hoping for that with Marquise Brown, who I thought was a pretty good receiver with the Ravens. They hoped it would go that way with Rashod Bateman. Obviously, it hasn't yet. You finally got it with Zay in his rookie year, but that was year 6 for Lamar. We're already 6 years into his career at that point, past the rookie contract. Plus, at the end of the day, you mentioned the offense. And I think we've had this conversation before, you and I, of which veteran wide receivers during that Greg Roman era wanted to come in and play for the Ravens when you knew that it was a tight end and running back centric offense, both rushing and passing. I mean, imagine Stephon Diggs in that offense, Cordell. He's complaining in week 4 about the targets, right? I remember Juju Smith-Schuster. I use this all the time on Michael Irvin's podcast a couple years ago. He was choosing between the Steelers, the Chiefs, and the Ravens. I think he ended up going back to the Steelers on a 1-year deal. But he said, I love Lamar, but that offense is just not suited for me. And I think a lot of wide receivers felt that same way. So I think context does matter. You put it beautifully there, because this isn't like receivers go in there and say, I'm going to get 10 targets a game. If your name was not Marquise Brown or Mark Andrews in that Greg Roman offense, you were not seeing probably more than 2 or 3 targets a game. And that was just the reality.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I two things. One, we've seen during that time when Lamar was on his cheap deal, when the Ravens would bring in receivers, they were over the hill receivers. The Dez Bryants being brought in, the Sammy Watkins being brought in. Like how many drop passes in 2019 did we see in that game against the Titans in the playoffs? Did we see hit guys right in the hands that had overachieved to that point anyway in the year? And I think Schlereth's words in saying that Lamar hasn't helped develop these receivers is incorrect, because anybody with talent that they have given him to catch the ball, he has made them look really good. Marquise has had really good seasons with the Ravens. Mark Andrews has looked good with the Ravens. Isaiah Likely has looked really good. Zay looked really good. I mean, Nelson looked good last year. Bateman has had his moments. Bateman is the one guy that has been inconsistent, and I think that's where you have to kind of look at all the missed time that Bateman has had, the missed time Lamar has had over the last couple of seasons. And it seems like they can't connect. It seems like when one is healthy, the other one isn't, or vice versa. And so, I thought when he said that Lamar hasn't developed these receivers, it's been incorrect, because any receiver that they have brought in, any pass catcher that they brought in that can play, Lamar has made them look good.
Yeah, and look, he won the MVP, and it's no disrespect to these guys, obviously, but he won the MVP with obviously Marquise there, but then it was Seth Roberts and Willie Snead and those types of players you were talking about. And even in, his MVP season last year, he did have Zay. It was a much better cast of weapons he had compared to 2019, but Zay was a rookie, albeit a very, very good one. But Bateman missed time early. Odell missed time early. Andrews went down with an injury. He was losing guys and getting guys back like left and right all over the place, and he still made do and won the MVP again. Plus, I don't know about you, Cordell, but I've never heard the notion that quarterbacks are responsible for wide receiver development. Have you heard that anywhere before?
Never heard it put like that. I mean, I think I know what he means. I mean, the quarterback and wide receiver, they're kind of tied to the hip. Their production, obviously receivers need quarterbacks to do anything. They can't throw the ball to themselves. So, I get it in that sense, but to make it seem like a wide receiver's development is strictly due to the quarterback, you've got other receivers around the league, that guys like Terry McLaurin, who has had a different quarterback every year of his career, and he goes against 1,000 yards. So that situation kind of debunks that theory. Sure, they're tied hand in hand, but no, a quarterback is not strictly dependent or should be strictly looked at to be the guy to develop receivers. You can have a receiver kind of grow out of a flower, grow out of concrete, so to speak, when you don't have a quarterback around.
Right. And maybe this is how he meant it, maybe not, but it would have made more sense if he said that quarterbacks can elevate receivers and receivers can elevate quarterbacks. Right. And I know that's exactly what you were saying there, where it's not the quarterback's pure 100% responsibility to go out there and develop those guys. But when you have a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, yeah, he can elevate receivers. And if you're using it that way, he has done it. We just ran through examples of how he's done that over the course of his career. So if you're using that as a point against Lamar Jackson, it's invalid, because there is countless proof of him actually doing that. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll continue this conversation, ask the question if Lamar has had enough help over the course of his career and how the Ravens have approached him and his pass catching talent. All that and more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to MLB games. It's been a really big part of my life, really, since I grew up. And for me, my dad and I, we used to go to a ton of Orioles games here in Baltimore. And still, going to games is a really great experience for me. And I love baseball. I played it growing up, and it's great. But Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from receipt, and the lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And on the Gametime app, of course, upcoming Orioles games are going to be huge, plus football coming up as well. The Ravens Gametime is your place for those tickets as well. And the Gametime app has a bunch of great features, my favorite being last-minute deals. You save 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Plus, the Gametime app is really easy to use, and other features include flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spell LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime's last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher and Cordell Woodland still talking with you here on this Wednesday. Cordell, I think the way that Lamar Jackson, obviously the controversy that he, for some reason, the national media gets and all the negative attention, it is honestly, it's a lot more than you see with guys like Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, and he seems to be discredited a lot more. But the things that he does with less has been so impressive to me, because in Cincinnati, you do have guys like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for Joe Burrow. Josh Allen has had guys like Stephon Diggs, and it's not just those guys, obviously. Mahomes had Tyreek Hill for a long time. We can't discount the tight end position. Obviously, Lamar has had Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely has come on a lot. But do you think generally, we kind of talked about this in the first part of the show, have you been happy with how the Ravens have handled the wide receiver position? Or do you think that kind of how they're doing it now is the right way? Do you think they've changed their philosophy? Where are you with how the Ravens have kind of handled Lamar's pass catching weapons?
Yeah, I do think they're trending in the right way. I think, when you had Greg Roman around, and you see how they're building that team out in LA and that Chargers team, and they're going to get a lot of tight ends. They're going to get running backs. They're building up the offensive line. Like, no wide receiver wants to be a part of that. And so you have kind of those lost years where they weren't putting a lot of energy into the receiver position. And yeah, they've got the tight ends. When you talk about pass catchers, the Ravens have the tight ends, Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, like you mentioned. I like what they're doing now. Zay's kind of the modern type of receiver that you look for. It's not just about size anymore. It's kind of the total package. And I think Zay provides that. I like Tez Walker and what he could give them in the future. But I think now the Ravens are a more wide receiver friendly type of offense. Now you can, if a wide receiver does hit the market and, it's within the Ravens pay range, we could see wide receivers want to come into this offense where there were years lost where they didn't. And it wasn't due to Lamar. It was just simply the type of style that they had. So now the way that they have to go about it is different, because Lamar is on, he's getting paid now. He's one of the top paid players in the league. So they can't just go out there and do what the Texans are doing and go get Stephon Diggs, go get some of the biggest name guys out there, and still have some of these other guys on their team that were monsters last year as well. So I do think the Ravens are headed in the right direction right now. And the offense they've run, like I said, is more wide receiver friendly. But yeah, there has been some time lost that they should have been investing in that wide receiver room, and they weren't.
And to that point too, I think even going back to the Marquise Brown conversation, when you talk about the decision the Ravens would have had to make on him if they didn't trade him to Arizona, there were rumblings at that time, whether he would have gotten it or not, I don't know. But it's like, if he were to get 15 per year, 20 per year, 25 per year from the Ravens, if that was the direction he was trending in, because he improved every single season over his first 3 years with the Ravens, if they were to give him a 15 or 20 million per year contract, would that even be worth it for the organization based off of how that offense was running? Is that just a waste of money at that point, regardless of how good Marquise could have gotten in this offense? Obviously, he felt like it wasn't the right fit for him, and now he's over in Kansas City. But it's kind of that thing where they were running the ball, the receivers weren't getting a ton of targets, they weren't bringing other guys in, and Lamar, I think, made the most of what he could with that situation. But the frustration was all across the league. While no team was necessarily running the offense Baltimore was, it still felt like it was the same story every offseason, which was they bring in one veteran wide receiver who's 34, 35 years old or on the back end of his career to fill in like a really big role. They had a rookie, but it's not impossible to win with that, but it's pretty hard, especially considering that talent at all positions is important, especially for Lamar, who, again, at the end of the day, he has been very vocal about, look, he loves throwing the ball, as he should. He's a quarterback. He's very good at doing that. But I think the Ravens, look, they lean into the running. It's a good thing. But for Lamar, I think just maximizing his arm talent, I don't think they did enough of that over the course of his rookie contract. Again, I think they're getting there, but I still think even now there's a little room for improvement in terms of they're taking a risk with Rashod Bateman as being their number 2. It could pay off, but we'll see how it pans out for him.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they've been spoiled over time I think everybody has been spoiled because Lamar has shown he can, maximize whatever they give him. He's done a lot with less. And so, during the time where the Ravens could go out and spend money, or should have spent money, I should say, on the wide receiver position, they weren't necessarily pushed to do it because Lamar's winning MVPs with, really just throwing the two guys. He's getting to the playoffs with over the hill wide receivers, and is making them feel like he can do it all. And I think that's what they're starting to get away from when you see them go and get Derrick Henry, when you see them, adding to the wide receiver room the way that they have been trying to recently and trying to get all these pass catchers in the building. I think they are starting to understand we can't win it all just by number 8 being Superman all the time. That's just not going to work every Sunday. And so, you're starting to see it change now, but I just feel like a chunk of Lamar's career to this point has just been lost because the Ravens were trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. They had a dominant rushing attack, but we see now, even with the Todd Monken era, they could still run the ball. Like, as long as number 8 is back there, they're going to have one of the best rushing attacks in the NFL. It didn't have to be as extreme as the way that it was when Roman was here. So that's kind of the issue. I think that the Ravens are now playing catch up and trying to build this team the way that they, feel like is best for them, which is not having everything go on Lamar's plate.
Right. And I think, again, that was their identity. That was their reputation for so many years, was this is a run first team to the biggest extreme there is. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think under Todd Monken and Steve Young, when I think he did an interview, I think it was with Kevin Clark, and he ended up talking about how this first Todd Monken year was almost like a transitional year from the big run days to, all right, now this is going to be a little bit more of a balanced offense. I think we're going to even see more of a shift over to that this season, even though they did bring in Derrick Henry. But what do you feel about the receiver group right now, Cordell? I know that there's a lot of conversation about Flowers being the one, which is, I think people are okay with that. That's not the big thing. It's obviously with them. They've re-signed Nelson Aguilar, but he's looked at as the 3. It's really Bateman as the 2, which has a lot of people like, okay, that's a pretty big risk, could pay off, but also we've seen it go the other way. Do you think they've done enough? Do you think it was the right decision, or would you have liked to see them maybe add more veteran talent?
Yeah, I mean, bringing Bateman back is, we kind of have to see how that plays out. I think everybody is enamored with the potential that Rashod Bateman has. The glimpses that we've seen from him, and the Ravens are just kind of betting on it all coming together, and we'll see. The talent's there. That's not a question. It's just whether or not that connection is truly there. And I still question that to this day. I think training camp is going to be huge for Lamar Jackson and Rashod Bateman because to this point in the offseason, from what I've seen, I haven't seen enough to make me feel like, okay, this connection is kind of going where it needs to go. So I'm really going to be paying attention to that in training camp. The thing about Lamar, though, throughout his career, the one thing that's been consistent is he's only going to have but so many guys he's consistently throwing the ball to. He has his guys that he trusts, and he's going to get them the ball. So Zay is in that circle. Mark is in that circle. Isaiah Likely's in that circle. Nelson's in that circle. I don't know if Bateman is, but if you're talking about guys that he's going to get the ball to regularly, it's going to be Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. That's going to happen a lot. I think Isaiah Likely could be in line for a huge year. I mean, everything I've seen from him to this point in the offseason, he's looked so good. He was the most impressive offensive player to me during minicamp, really during OTAs as well. He just really looks like he's taking the next step. And I'm not trying to start any drama, but he just at times looks like if you didn't know the depth chart on this Ravens team, you probably would think that this dude was the tight end 1 at times just because of some of the wild plays he has made at various points in the offseason. I don't want to downplay Mark Andrews because I know how good Mark Andrews is. And I especially when he's healthy, he's the guy Lamar's looking to every time he gets into trouble. I don't think that's going to change, but Likely definitely gives them another guy that can make some of those wild plays. We saw some of it last season. I really think he's in line to take a huge step this year. So I like the weapons. Tez Walker, I think as minicamp got to the back end, he started to really come on a little bit on some of those down the field routes. And I think that'll be kind of his calling card to carving out a role for himself in this offense, is if he can be a guy that can consistently take the top off the defense on schedule, because on schedule passing is something that this Ravens offense needs to be better at in general. That's something Lamar needs to improve at. So if they could get a guy like Tez Walker that can win deep on schedule, that'll be huge for this offense and open up that middle for guys like Likely, Zay, and Mark as well. So I like the pass catchers right now. I think there's always room for improvement. They don't have the best, when you talk about pass catchers, you have to include the tight ends. It gets tricky when it comes to ranking the Ravens compared to other teams, because it's like, all right, while the Ravens have the tight ends, the Bengals have the receivers. Which one do you value more? And I don't know how that order goes, but the Ravens do have the pass catchers, I think, that can help them win games, especially if they do get into situations where they have to throw the ball a little more.
Yes, those are some of the biggest talking points of the offseason. How can the Ravens utilize Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews together? Can they get together a little bit more of a deep passing game and have that be a bit more consistent? So I think they have the personnel to do it. It's just a matter of if everybody can play their role effectively, obviously with the spotlight being on Rashod Bateman. Coming up, though, we'll be talking about some general minicamp and OTA observations, plus the outside linebacker position. Do the Ravens have enough there after losing Jadeveon Clowney? Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. We are back rounding out Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher and Cordell Woodland still with you here on this Wednesday edition episode of the show. Be sure to like and subscribe here, video form and audio form. Really appreciate all the support here on the show. Cordell, I think when you talk about the Ravens, there's so much excitement about this year. Obviously, the way last year ended was just so disappointing for so many people. Everybody thought that was the year. The roster felt perfect. The coaching staff felt perfect. Going to be a different year this time around. Obviously, that preparation did begin during OTAs and minicamp. You were out there at Owings Mills. I know you can't necessarily take too much away from non-padded practices and kind of the lightness that some of these practices get. I know towards the end there, guys were just joking around and having a good time, and it's a little light during this point of the offseason. But what did you see? Whether you want to talk a bit more about Bateman or Likely or Tez Walker, just general observations, who impressed you, and maybe who did you think you wanted to see a little more out of that didn't show you what you needed to see?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like you said, it's unpadded practices, so we want to look at the offensive line because that's a big question for this team. 3 open spots, but it's just not a lot to garner there. I mean, even when we talked to John Harbaugh about it and asked him how much stock he's putting into those practices when it comes to the offensive line competition, he said not a lot. It's really just technique and assignment and making sure guys knew what was going on. Now, I will say, it did feel like Ben Cleveland was kind of in the back of the line when it came to this offensive line competition. It's 2 guard spots open, the right tackle spot open, and the thought was that Ben Cleveland at least could be in line for one of those guard spots, seeing that he's kind of the veteran of that group. But from everything I saw, it didn't feel like Ben Cleveland was truly in the running. At least if he is in the running, he's kind of, like I said, on the back end of that order right now. So that was a little disappointing, I guess, for him. In terms of the wide receivers, Lamar and Nelly's connection is really good. We saw it last year. Nelly was a guy that was really efficient with his opportunities, 3rd, 4th wide receiver on any given week. But it just felt like whenever he did get chances, he took advantage of it. And that's still what you're seeing. Lamar definitely trusts him quite a bit. And their connection, you start looking at Bateman and Lamar, right? And you start trying to figure out how are they building that connection or what's wrong with it. And you start just comparing it to Lamar's connection with other receivers. And if I'm just comparing it to a guy like Nelson Aguilar, Nelson and Lamar have their communication with each other is really in sync. It's times where Lamar threw an incomplete pass to Nelly because he thought Nelly was going to do something and he didn't, or vice versa. And they instantly come up to each other. They talk it out. Lamar lets him be known, what he thought, what he saw, and Nelly's, whether he's listening or speaking his piece, whatever the case is, they're working it out. As opposed to when it's an incomplete pass to Bateman, it feels like Bateman he takes it so hard. It feels like he takes it a little personal. I don't want to say personal, but it just feels like he's taking that negative play hard. He may need a second. He may walk off by himself. He may need to take his helmet off, take a knee, just catch a breather or whatever. But it's just not that, we didn't connect. All right, I'm going to come up to you and figure out what happened. What did you see? I'll tell you what I saw. Like, let's figure it out now so that the next time is better. It just doesn't feel like that communication part is there between the two. So that's something that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to in training camp for sure, to see how that's continuing to evolve. I thought Trenton Simpson was pretty good. He flew around quite a bit. Obviously a lot of eyes on him filling in for Patrick Queen. I think initially he'll be a better cover guy than Patrick Queen was a couple of years ago when he initially came in. But I do think there's going to be some rawness there. I think there's going to be, times where maybe his eyes get him into trouble because he's going to be a downhill guy. He's a guy whose speed is kind of his superpower. So when you're young and, you're figuring it out, you're playing fast, which he's supposed to do. But he's going to make some mistakes fast as well, I think. And they're going to be growing pains with him at the start of the year. That should be expected. But the hope is that over time, he starts to mature in those things. Some of the things he messed up in earlier, they go away. I thought Nate Wiggins was a pleasant surprise. You don't really get to notice how frail he is at times because his speed does show. His speed does play on the field. That's good. He didn't get a lot of opportunities, the ball thrown his way, but it seemed like technique-wise and positioning, he was there. The Ravens did things where they, kind of had the young guys on one field and the veteran guys on another. And to Nate Wiggins' credit, he was not really on the field with the young guys. He was out there with the veteran guys quite a bit. So that's a good thing. TJ Tampa, I thought he had an up and down off season, but I thought he finished strong. Him and Tez Walker have really been kind of connected the way that Kyle Hamilton and Isaiah Likely were that rookie year as well. It reminds me a lot of those two battles. So for the most part, Tez Walker was beating them. But what I liked about TJ Tampa is that the thing is, and I encourage people to know this, especially people that are going to go out to training camp, and you see these guys, especially in these unpadded practices, the DBs aren't allowed to make a play on the ball down the field. They're just there to be in position, but they're not allowed to try to make a play, to try to intercept the ball or anything like that. They want to minimize the injuries as much as they can. So you got to see Tez Walker take advantage of that at times. But at the back end of the camp, TJ Tampa, I thought he really did some good things, playing a little more physical within reason and making some plays on the ball. So I was impressed with him as camp went on. And lastly, I'll say Marcus Williams had a really good camp. I thought Marcus Williams was all over the field and he was really vocal. He brought the energy every day to practice, I would say. Usually guys like Roquan Smith and Mark Andrews, and it was still the case. They're barking, they're doing a lot of the talking throughout practice. But Marcus Williams was the guy that every day you heard him crack, whether it's cracking jokes or whether it's him getting guys in position, calling out stuff while the play is going on. He was really locked in throughout many camps. So it was good to see. And, as long as he's healthy, that duo of him and Kyle Hamilton, that's going to be one of the best safety duos in the league. The question still remains, though, who's going to be that third guy to kind of play that Geno Stone role, because they're going to miss those 7 interceptions, and they're just going to miss somebody that they can try to be back there to allow Kyle Hamilton to be that ultimate chess piece.
Yeah, and I think with Williams, it's just about, you're right, staying healthy and being able, him and Hamilton, there's no question they're the best safety duo in the league, in my opinion, at least. But that safety depth, I know whether the team wants to trust Adarius Washington, Sanusi Kane, Bo Braid, there is a bunch of conversation there about just what that depth will look like behind those guys. Now, one more thing about Bateman, Cordell. You mentioned him a bit and just like what his process has been. There was a clip of Lamar Jackson throwing to Nelson Aguilar. I think Tez Walker was there, and I don't know where it was. I don't know if it was confirmed Florida, just where it was. Lamar talked about getting guys together and throwing during the course of OTAs and minicamp, and seems to be that came to fruition. Now, Rashod Bateman was not there, and it caused the fan base to go two sides. Either he should be there, why isn't he there? Or it doesn't matter, he's not there. It matters if he's there at training camp. That's when it really starts. Where are you on that fence? I mean, look, it'd be great if he was there, but at the same time, it kind of reminds me of voluntary OTAs, where it's like, it's their decision. Like, they're not required to be there. Yes, it'd be great if he was there. I'd love it, but I'm not going to sit here and just rag on him because he wasn't.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle. Because like you said, it is voluntary. If they want to go, they can go. I'm not, forcing anybody to do anything, especially when it's voluntary. I felt that same way about OTAs, and people were upset that Lamar was barely there. And I'm just like, for a guy like him, especially two-time MVP, it's not like if Lamar is not there, we're going to look back on this come week 10 and say, oh, Lamar's struggling because he wasn't at OTAs in April or May. Like that's just not my line of thinking. But what I did say at that time was that I do believe that Rashod Bateman and Lamar Jackson need to get together as much as they can, whether it's out in Owens Mill, South Florida, Arizona, wherever. They need to strengthen that bond, that connection that they have with each other at all costs. And because last year, all we got was all these highlight reels of Rashod Bateman running wide open and not getting the ball. And we all attributed that to the connection with Lamar not being there. The Ravens make this monetary investment in Rashod Bateman. Okay. So we have met, and they've talked it up all season that this was Rashod Bateman's year, that he was going to, be a big part of the offense. Okay. So you would like to start seeing something to trend in that direction, and them getting together at training camp. That's great. But the thing is, I would say is that, so all these other guys are going to be there too. Zay's going to be there. Nelly's going to be, all these guys that already have a better rapport with Lamar, that have been working out with Lamar, they're going to be there too. So I think that one of the issues that Bateman has had to deal with is that he's behind in the pecking order in terms of the trust meter. And my question is, what has happened since the AFC Championship to today to help grow that trust meter between the two? If they're not getting together on their own, on their free time, it's kind of just like doing the same thing all over again, expecting a different result. So that's kind of how I look at it. I'm not forcing Bateman to go down there. I mean, I feel like it's both of them. Like Lamar said it. While in that clip, he said guys don't want to leave their state. And of course, everybody insinuates that he's talking about Bateman. And I would say that's an educated guess. I'm not going to sit here and lie and act like I didn't think that's what he said, standing there as he said it. But also, Lamar in that same clip acknowledges he's not leaving Florida. He doesn't want to leave South Florida. So he himself is acknowledging that he's kind of being stubborn as well, not wanting to go anywhere else. So it's on both of them. And the reality is Lamar's not going anywhere. Lamar's here. He's the face of the franchise. So yes, fair or unfair, the onus is on Rashod Bateman to do what he can do to make that connection strong, because Zay's doing it. Nelson's doing it. Likely's doing it. It's like nobody's gonna feel sorry that Rashod Bateman is the odd man out when all off season while we could say the same thing for Lamar, that he didn't go out of his way to link with Rashod Bateman, that doesn't change what Lamar's doing. Lamar's got other people to throw the ball. Rashod Bateman only has one guy that can throw him the ball. He doesn't have options. So it's imperative for him, if he wants to get the best version of him, go out there and have the great year that he wants to have, he's got to build that connection with his quarterback some way, somehow. And them working out in separate states or working out separately all off season, like, I'm not the guy that sits here and watches social media to see who's working out with who and all that stuff. I really don't, but because I feel like it comes out when the games matter. It'll show when we're watching the games. I don't need to see your 10-second clip on Instagram or something like that. So that's my concern, is that the trust meter, the relationship, that connection is borderline where it was when we ended last season, when we pick up in training camp. And that in itself would be concerning to me.
Right. And I think we're on the same wavelength there, because again, like, you're not saying you're going to say, oh, he has to be there and I'm forcing him. But at the same time, the work would be beneficial if he was there. And right. I think that it would, while again, I don't think they're going to win or lose a Super Bowl off of him not being there for one workout or whatever with Lamar before training camp. I think any work, it's my same stance with voluntary OTAs. I would love if every single person showed up if I were the Ravens. I know the Ravens would love if every single person showed up to voluntary OTAs, but they're not required to. So I can't just sit here and say, yeah, well, this is an absolute disgrace, because at the end of the day, it is his choice. But at the same time, when you're in the position Rashod Bateman is, it's a little different than, let's say, Zay, who, and Mark Andrews, like you talked about, Cordell, who do have that connection. So there were two sides of that argument. Like, we didn't even talk about the outside linebackers yet. We got so caught up in the wide receivers, which again, I think is the bigger point. So let's wrap it up quickly with that. Outside linebacker wise, you lose Jadeveon Clowney if you're the Ravens. You're expecting a big year from Odafe Owe, hopefully for the organization. David Ajabo hopefully takes a big step up. Do you think they have enough there with re-signing Kyle Van Noy, or are you a little concerned with the uncertainty that guys like Ajabo and maybe even Adisa Isaac bring to the table?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about the pass rush right now. And usually in the past, I feel like over the last few seasons, everybody's questioning the Ravens pass rush going into training camp. Everybody's concerned about it. I typically haven't been, because I felt like the scheme is built in the scheme to get pressure on the quarterback. So the personnel didn't necessarily concern me, because I felt like just naturally they'd get to the quarterback. Right now, I'm a little concerned because they lose Clowney, who's had a monster year for them last year. You lose Patrick Queen, who was so good for them as a blitzer, getting pressure on the quarterback. And sure, Trenton Simpson may be able to do some of that stuff. We'll see. The jury is still out on Odafe Owe, and it's sad to say that, because it's been some time. And I like Odafe Owe. I do think he's better than some of the people give him credit for. But it's time to start showing up now in terms of the pass rush department. Adisa Isaac, I mean, it's kind of wait and see with him. We haven't really gotten to see him at all. He's kind of been on the sideline from rookie minicamp. So he's one in the David Ajabo boat. That's just like, it's wait and see. Ajabo, it's tough for me to get excited about him anymore. The injuries, and then when we did see him last preseason, it was kind of underwhelming. He's not really popping out in these preseason games against backups and stuff like that. So I just first need to see him healthy and able to practice and able to do something. And then I can start worrying about the football related stuff. But it's just hard to find guys that you can trust right now in the pass rush department for the Ravens. Is Madubuike going to be a 13.5 sack guy again? I doubt it. I still think he'll be really good, but it's just tough to depend on anybody that plays as an interior defensive lineman to go get you double-digit sacks, let alone 13. So I don't. What's his ceiling now? What's his floor really? Going from that 13.5, is 8 the good number? Is 8 solid? I mean, I think I'd take 8 with him still being able to do the things that he does in the run game and just getting pressure on the quarterback. I like Van Noy, but at some point, Father Time catches up, and you don't know if that'll be the year this year. I think Clowney did a lot of things for the Ravens last year and gave them that edge guy that teams really had to game plan for and double team at times. As good as Van Noy was last year, as strong as Owe can be, I don't think they have a guy right now that's demanding the type of attention that Clowney demanded last year as the year went on. So that's something that I'm going to be watching. But like I said, the scheme does allow them to cut corners. They blitz their linebackers quite a bit, and that's worked. They love that nickel blitz. Kyle Hamilton does things. So we'll see what types of things they're able to cook up schematically to kind of offset their personnel lacks.
Yeah, and it's a big storyline because I think there is a lot of uncertainty. Really, it's the year of replacement plan. I mean, we talked about it on 105.7, Cordell. It's the replacement plans, these guys stepping up, and a bunch of vets leave. They're replacing them with a bunch of young guys, essentially, which is a risk, but it could pay off in a very big way. It also could backfire in a big way as well. I think outside linebacker is one of those positions for sure. But I appreciate you hopping on. Thanks so much for giving me the time. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, you can check out my show, Shaking It Up Sports, on 105.7 The Fan. You can download the Odyssey app, listen wherever you are, even if you're not here in Maryland. You can follow me on social media at Cordell Woodland, constantly putting out updates, covering the Ravens, also cover the Baltimore Orioles. So we're in baseball season as well. So a lot going on for sure.
Links will be in the description down below. Be sure to check out Cordell's work. Follow him on social media. He does an awesome job. And Cordell, thanks again for the time. And thank you for tuning in to Locked On Ravens today. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content on 4th of July. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.